What's up everyone and welcome back to the MMA Zone. Today, let's get started with Charles Oliveira will win rematch against Islam Makhachev? When Charles Oliveira and Islam Makhachev clashed in Abu Dhabi at UFC 280, many believed that given the grappling pedigree of the pair, it would be Charles Oliveira's striking that would prove to be the X factor in the fight. Ultimately, however, Du Bronx struggled to find success in the fight, both on the ground and on the feet. While normally Oliveira is quick to find his range, he seemed to be hesitant to throw at points, and unable to find his timing in others, throwing a flying knee that missed and left him open for a big counter hook that sent him to the canvas, where Makhachev finished the fight. Heading into the rematch between the two at UFC 294, Islam Makhachev sits as a heavy betting favorite, with many of the mindset that the champion will once again be able to pick up a win over Charles Oliveira. With that being said, there's still plenty of support for the former champ, with fellow Brazilian standout Thiago Moises throwing his support behind Oliveira during a recent interview with MMA Fighting, reiterating the same thing Du Bronx himself said regarding his UFC 280 performance being an off night. I think Charles, he didn't look good in that fight, and Islam looked very sharp on the feet. His wrestling is very good. His jiu-jitsu is very good also. But I think if Charles learned from his mistakes and if his mind is in the right place and he fights the same way he fought Dariush, I think he has a lot of chances to win that fight. In Oliveira's latest outing against Beneil Dariush, he showcased a much more measured approach to his striking, landing a head kick that let the world know he alone deserves the next crack at the 155-pound title. Whether or not it's enough to reclaim the belt on October 21st, only time will tell. Shout out to our first comments on yesterday's video. Thanks for the support. Sean Strickland's game plan for Israel Adesanya fight. As Hall of Famer Michael Bisping explained regarding the UFC 293 clash between Israel Adesanya and Sean Strickland, the challenger has a rather underrated ground game. As he learned during his time training with Strickland years back, the title challenger is a real threat on the ground. Despite being a strong grappler, many have questioned whether or not he has the means of getting the fight to the ground against a fighter like Israel Adesanya. Heading into the bout, Strickland has been open about the fact that he's been working on his wrestling, although he isn't sure whether or not he'll use it. During a recent interview with James Lynch of Fanatics View, Strickland's coach, Eric Nixick, spoke about Strickland's mindset heading into the fight.
So we joke about that stuff, but in all seriousness, he does have to get into some wrestling. He does have to get in some clinches. He does have to do some stuff to make it, where it's just not a kickboxing fight, because that's where Izzy's going to do his best, and he'll get in there right away and see, we had to deal with that when Brad fought Izzy. The length, man, Izzy's a freaking sniper, and it's hard. He can get to you and it's hard to get to him. So
although Strickland is riding into the bout on a 2-fight winning streak, when the two men step into the octagon in Sydney, it'll be interesting to see how he handles the pressure of a hostile crowd. With the MMA community eagerly awaiting the matchup, we want to hear from you. How do you see things playing out when Adesanya and Strickland compete inside the octagon? Drop your predictions in the comment section down below. Chito Vera breaks down O'Malley vs. Sterling fight. Heading into UFC 292, Marlon Chito Vera knew that a win over Pedro Munoz could put him in a position to challenge for the bantamweight title if Sugar Sean O'Malley defeated Aljamain Sterling in the main event. Of course, O'Malley went on to make history, landing a picture-perfect right hand that spelled the end of the fight, while opening the door to a rematch with Vera in December in the process. Although there's been no word from the UFC as to whether or not O'Malley will be competing against Vera before the end of the year, Chito recently appeared on Brendan Schaub's Food Truck Diaries to discuss what went wrong for Aljamain Sterling, not just in the fight, but leading up to the fight as well.
I think his mind wasn't ready for the pressure of the lights, for the magnitude of the event, and I believe Aljamain f***ed up. He beat Cejudo in Brooklyn. He should be I'm fighting in December. You want to strip me? Strip me.
Agree 100% with you.
And he kind of went oh, I want to make $1 million or maybe over. I'm going to just do it.
With Sterling eager to avenge his recent loss to O'Malley, it'll be interesting to see how the UFC handles the logjam of contenders at 135 pounds. Do you think O'Malley will wind up defending the belt against Chito in December, or will another challenger meet him inside the octagon? Drop your predictions in the comment section below. UFC fight updates. As we make our way through the weekend, let's take a look at some recently announced fights for upcoming cards. First up on the calendar, we have a clash between Felipe Lins and Ian Cutelaba, scheduled for UFC Vegas on October 7th. The contest will see Lins look to build on a 3-fight win streak that most recently saw him defeat Ovince St. Preux and Maxim Grissom this year, while Cutelaba looks to close out the year strong after snapping a 3-fight skid earlier this year by defeating Tanner Boser in April. Next up on the calendar, we have a bout between Eduarda Moura and So-Yul Kim, who will both compete at UFC Sao Paulo on November 4th. The bout will see Brazilian star Eduarda Moura look to continue her unbeaten streak after picking up a Dana White's Contender Series victory over Janaina Silva in August. On the flip side, Kim will be looking to build on an impressive win streak of her own that has recently saw her rattle off 2 submission wins at 1 Friday fights this year. The card will also play host to a recently announced bout between Daniel Santos and Daniel Marcos, which will see Santos look to build on a 2-fight win streak, while Marcos looks to build on his perfect 15-0 record, which most recently saw him pick up a win over Davey Grant this summer. Before we continue, make sure you give that like button some love, and be sure to subscribe to the MMA Zone for all of the latest news. Jon Jones makes admission about heavyweight debut. When Jon Jones finally made his return to the octagon to compete against Ciryl Gane earlier this year, he did so against arguably the best striker in the heavyweight division. Of course, Jones used his grappling to make quick work of the French star, securing the heavyweight title with a big submission win. As he gears up for his UFC 295 showdown with Stipe Miocic, Jones admitted that, in hindsight, it was nice not having to worry about fighting a heavy-hitting powerhouse like Francis Ngannou in his heavyweight debut after 3 years off. He spoke on a recent episode of the Overdogs podcast.
Yes, when I got back, Francis was very much on the roster still, and I could have been in his last fight, but instead he opted out, and Ciryl Gane took Francis's spot. I came back ready for Francis Ngannou for sure. I'm not gonna lie though, knowing that I was fighting Ciryl Gane instead of Francis was kind of nice. Francis is a scary joker.
Leading up to Gane's upcoming bout with Sergey Spivak, Jones has been pretty open about the fact that his November showdown with Stipe Miocic could be his last. The big question is, do you think he'll follow through with retirement? Drop your predictions in the comment section below. Dustin Poirier versus Gilbert Burns next? Dustin Poirier has made it clear that he is not going anywhere despite his recent UFC 291 loss to Justin Gaethje. Given that, Gilbert Burns was quick to throw his name in the hat when Poirier took to Twitter to look for an opponent for his next fight. This week, Burns once again reiterated his desire to compete against Poirier should the former interim champ decide to make the jump up to welterweight. He spoke during MMA Fighting's Portuguese Trocação Franca podcast. "If you ask me which fight I wanted, it's Dustin Poirier," Burns said on the podcast. "He's moving up, and that would be a super cool fight, but everyone's calling him out. Everybody wants him, so I won't talk too much about it. But it's a cool fight because of his name, because he's moving up. It makes sense for him to fight against a top 5 welterweight." Burns recently received another shot of stem cells in his shoulder and is eager to make his return to the octagon. According to a recent tweet, after 6 more weeks of recovery, he'll be 100% cleared to return to training. With his return on the horizon, who do you want to see him compete against once he returns to the octagon? Drop your thoughts in the comment section below. And now for our breaking news story of the day. We have the MMA community going off on the biased judges at UFC Paris. 3 of the fights at Paris seem to have favored the French fighters, and to fans, it was pretty obvious. Winning in overall striking, but getting dominated on the ground, both Taylor Lapillus and Nora Cornol won their fights with no ground control time and just 10 more strikes landed. Kellen Lofgren controlled Taylor Lapillus for 6 minutes 23 seconds on the ground. We've seen in the past fighters, Islam, win based on ground control. But for this event, the French fighters seem to be favored. On top of that, one of the fights in the main event, French fighter William Gomez kicked his opponent, Yanis Gamuri, with a low blow, and the referee stopped the fight thinking that he was hurt and unable to continue. Here's what fans had to say. Even Nora Cornol's own crowd was booing the decision. That has to be a little telling. Another fan said, "Judges have been drinking tonight." Someone else said, "Ref had a winning parlay and had to keep the streak going." What do you think? Are the judges in Paris biased and wanted the French fighters to win? Let us know in the comments below. Top comments. Cejudo sounds bitter that Sugar got it done when he couldn't. Gaethje could clown Masvidal. I would say at least reimburse Wonderboy for the training camp. That seems pretty fair. If you want to be featured on our next video, make sure to leave a comment and don't forget to check out yesterday's video in case you missed it.